Hey folks, welcome back to Ken Michaels Radio. Thanks to all of you who've been watching my videos, all conversations about the Beatles. And I greatly appreciate not just your viewing, but I've really been digging all the comments that you write on my YouTube channel. And if you ever want to write to me privately as well, you can always shoot me an email at everylittlething@att.com. And if you have any suggestions of things that you'd like me to cover here on the channel, if there's certain features that I have that you really like the most and you want to see more of that, please let me know. My special guest this time is Daniel COSTON. Daniel has many credits. He is a photographer, I had to write them all down, archivist, videographer, author of several books. He has worked with the likes of the following artists: Johnny Cash, very impressive just for that alone. The Avett Brothers, Carolina Chocolate Drops, the Beach Boys, the Monkees, Wilco. Can't even read my own handwriting. Guided by Voices, Big Star, and the Jayhawks. A lot of great bands there. So many great artists. And there's actually two acts that came out of the 60s that we're going to be talking about on our show this time, as well as Daniel giving us a Fab Five show here. And those two bands are the Cyrkle and the Left Banke. And by the way, if you are a fan of our good friend Plastic E.P. over in Australia, you'll know that Daniel is a frequent guest, practically a regular on his channel over there.
Those are fun shows to do. And the one recently we did with Ethan Russell was like me talking to my own childhood. That was an amazing experience. Yeah, please check out Plastic shows. They're a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I have to check out that one. I can't keep up with him. He puts out videos every day.
But yeah, every day I get an email from him saying, hey, do you want to do this show, do that show? And if I'm home or if anywhere near home, I'll run home and do it.
Okay. Before we talk about, we'll talk about the Cyrkle in just a moment. It seems to me, I look at the list of these artists here, and there's a lot of different genres, but you seem to like a lot of the very strong melodic acts like the Jayhawks and Big Star, and obviously Beach Boys, Monkees, you name it here, the Avett Brothers. Is that primarily, where do your musical tastes lie? Because I do know you also from Plastic E.P. show as being a big Beatles fan, but you know, how widespread are your tastes? But are you primarily more like that, a very, not so much power pop, but you know, very melodic band?
It started there. I heard Abbey Road when I was 4 years old, and I was changed for life. You know, I was like, oh my God, you can make a record like that. And then you start saying, okay, what else is there? From my grandparents, I got big band. I spent the last few years listening to a lot of big band and what we refer to as dance band music, which is pre-swing music. From listening to different friends, you pick up some of the groups you mentioned. I like to say that all the bands I listened to or was a fan of growing up, I ended up working with, which is largely true. The Beach Boys were the first concert I ever saw in my life when I was 10 years old. Ended up doing photos for their tour program 33 years later. I like songs. I like harmony. I like things that grab you. You know, pop is not a four-letter word. You know, if you like it, you dig it, you should listen to it. And that's always been my philosophy. So I am a bit of a 60s geek, but I do kind of wander off. I mean, I'm really proud of my work with Wilco, which actually some folks will see pretty soon, an upcoming release. It just, you know, we're all different people on different days. So my music tastes are kind of like that too.
Yeah. So many of these acts are the ones that I listen to on the radio, stations that play current, or I should say, you know, bands say from the 80s on up, as well as the classic stuff. But these bands, Death Cab for Cutie, those kind of bands, I can certainly see anybody that loves 60s music would gravitate towards those if, you know, if they gave that music a chance. But you've been involved with the Cyrkle, and this is a band that all Beatle fans should be aware of because they actually toured with the Beatles in the United States in 1966, and they were managed by Brian Epstein. So tell us how you became involved with the band. And I know that one of the primary members, Tom Dawes, passed away several years ago now, but the status of the band now, and there's a new release that's imminent.
And speaking of Tom Dawes, I'll be bringing him up shortly. Obviously, a huge fan of the Cyrkle for years. Had gone to listen to him, collected their records, and then the current version of the band has the original singer and guitarist Don Daneman with Mike Loskamp, who he joined after the Beatles tour, so he's on Neon and the Minx. And I discovered one day that they were playing in Van Wert, Ohio, which is as remote as it sounds, and drove 10 hours to see them do a free show, and got to know them and talked to them. And they were kind of stunned that somebody drove from Charlotte, North Carolina to see them, and then drove back home. And the more I thought about it, I was like, originally I was going to pitch a book to them. As you mentioned, I've written several books, all mostly pertaining to music. And I just started going, what if they made the record they didn't get to make in 1968? A lot of Cyrkle fans will know that they had been recording several more songs, working towards another album when the band broke up in January '68. So to me, particularly ending with the Minx soundtrack, which is a great soundtrack, but it is a porno. So the Cyrkle always deserved better, to my mind. And I just pitched them an idea. So here's a crazy idea. What if you got to make one more Cyrkle album? Maybe not quite the record you had made in '68, but the record you would make now. And they immediately told me I was crazy, and I agreed with them. But I just said, I think this is something I want to see happen. As a fan, I want to see them make a new studio album. So we got 6 songs done the weekend before the world went crazy in March of 2020. And we eventually released some of those songs through Universal over the last year. And we now have more than an album's worth of songs. And we've got one more session planned in the next month. And we hope to have possibly one of 2 albums coming out this summer, the first new Cyrkle studio album since 1967.
Wow.
And it sounds great. I'm excited. And this is breaking news. I'll let you guys know and let you know about it, Ken, is we actually have Tom Dawes back on a Cyrkle album. And this came out of something that happened in this office about a year ago. I was looking for an obscure Sarah Carter and Maybelle Carter recording, as one does, and found a CD that Andrew Sandoval of Monkees archival managing fame, and done an amazing job with that band over the last 10 years. And he had done a song with Tom Dawes in 2005, and he'd given me the CD, and I finally found the CD, and I went, okay, what if? And so I sent Don the song. I said, Don, I'm not going to tell you anything about this. Listen to it and tell me what you think. He goes, oh, I like that. It's a good song. It's very 60s. And I said, you recognize the harmonies? It's Tom. And oh, his face lit up. And because he had always his fans will know, Tom left unexpectedly, had a heart attack and passed away in 2007, just as he and Don were talking about reuniting in a new band, a new project. It's very true. And Don said, I always wanted to sing one more song with Tommy. And so I got Andrew to send me the tracks, and I sent them to Don. And Don has created a new song out of those backing tracks. This song is called We Thought We Could Fly, and it is being debuted this week on YouTube, and will be available as a download for singles. And it's basically the new Cyrkle single, credited to the Cyrkle with Don Daneman and Tom Dawes. So it is their first studio recording since 1967, which is it's amazing. And it all, to think it all started me rummaging through this office one night. So, and I will tell you that we've also gone and worked on the song that Andrew had done, the original song that Andrew did with Tom. And I think you'll hear that too on this new album. So it just feels right. Tom was a huge part of the Cyrkle sound, both as the harmony vocalist, the bassist, the occasional guitarist, his personality, which I've heard tons of great stories about. And so it's like, yeah, I want Tom Dawes on this record. And we did it.
That's great, because you're helping Tom achieve his dream, since he wanted a reunion in the first place.
Yes.
So yeah, I looked at their website, and they recut Red Rubber Ball.
Correct.
And Turn Down Day. And they made videos for them. And they also recorded the 59th Street Bridge song, Feeling Groovy, which
Correct.
I never knew was actually offered to them and they turned it down.
Yes, they were in Studio A in New York, and they went to visit a Simon and Garfunkel session, and Paul Simon said, "Hey, I got a new song for you," and he played them this song, and the band turned it down for a variety of reasons. One, their third single, "Please Don't Ever Leave Me," was about to be released. It was set to be the next single, so they couldn't have changed it anyway. I think Don and Tom are both also trying to get more of their own songs, from the B side to the A side. So there was a little bit of that. It was just more for timing that they turned it down. And to be honest, when we went in March 2020 to record, that song was not on the table. Now they've been playing the song live, and I will mention that Don White, Scott Langley, Dean Castron of the Ohio Express is now in the band, and Pat McLaughlin are a great addition. They are Cyrkle members. Shout out to them and the Cyrkle Wives.
Okay.
And yes, it is a clan unto itself. I do recommend, say hello next time you see them. And I just threw this at them. I said, we're like discussing what to warm up with in the studio. And I said, okay, you hadn't planned on this, go record this. Because I knew they knew it because they've been playing it live. And I just said, if it works, great. If it doesn't work, we won't use it. And they recorded it and it worked. And so technically that became their first new single since 1967. So I think those recordings will be part of this new album. If you go see the Cyrkle live, you also can find these new recordings on a 4-song EP called New Favorites. And I thought that's how it'll just suggested itself. So, but yeah, please. The biggest thing for me about these recordings was that we do it right. There's been a lot of bands who go back and record their hits or popular songs, and it doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound the same. And ultimately, these songs had to sound like the Cyrkle. And it was to watch that band record that song and then have Don Daneman double track his lead vocals, which is his trademark. It's like as soon as you hear that voice double track, there it is. There's the sound. So please check those songs out, but definitely look out for this new album. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Could you just explain, because I didn't really do the research on this, but I've always been curious. Red Rubber Ball, which was co-written by Paul Simon, how did that fall in the timeline there with Simon and Garfunkel and all? And was it a hit right around the time of the Sounds of Silence, or
it was
that was their first
right? It was shortly thereafter. What had happened was, as you mentioned, Paul Simon did write that song with Bruce Woodley of the Seekers, and then there is a Seekers version out there too, which I do recommend. And as you might know, Paul and Artie essentially had broken up and just kind of figured that Columbia was done after their first album came out, and a DJ started pushing them to add a backing to Sounds of Silence. So becomes a hit in the region, then a hit nationally. They hit the road. Well, they did a short tour, and that bass player on that tour was Tom Dawes. So he had been around the publishers. He knew that Tom had recorded a lot of songs in England, so many which ended up on their second album, Sounds of Silence. And he heard that song, and my understanding is that Tommy's the one that brought that song to the band. And John Simon and their producer and everybody said, you know what, that's it. So their original keyboardist is I'm blanking on his name, darn it. Earl Pickens, thank you. Yeah. And he is not on that recording. He is on Turn Down Day. That's John Simon on the Hammond B3 on Red Rubber Ball, doing that calliope sound. That was a Hammond B3, by the way.
Okay. And that sitar-like sound on Turn Down Day was what exactly?
My understanding, that was a sitar played by Tom Dawes. I think it was Mike to give it more of a sound. If you hear our recording or the new recording, that is an electric sitar, or a guitar made that has a sitar-like sound. But my understanding is that was a sitar that Tom basically taught himself to play for that recording.
Okay. Also, I should point out that unless things have changed, Don Daneman is scheduled to be at the Fest for Beatle fans.
Yes, he is, and it's his first fest. Yes, yeah.
So for anyone that's watching this after the fest, because we're recording this on March 23rd, the fest is April 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. I think Don is only there on Sunday.
Sunday,
Correct?
yes, because
Yeah.
the Cyrkle has gigs in Michigan Friday and Saturday. So Don is flying in with Pat on Sunday. Please say hello to them and please check out our new recordings. And Don has a ton of stories. It's been wonderful to get to know him, and and Don became both he and Tom became successful jingle writers and performers. So that's a CD I'd love to see sometime of one of Don's post Cyrkle recordings and Tom's. I think that might happen down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did Tom write as far as jingles?
He wrote Plop Plop Fizz Fizz. So, and
could he have lived off of that alone?
I've gotten the impression that Tom worked really hard and created a lot. I think he co-wrote 2 books that I know of, may have written a third. Was involved with documentaries, produced a number of records. He produced the last 2 albums for Rod Price, who was in Foghat.
Right.
I mean, he did really well on that song and a number of other songs, but I think Tom, like Don, was always restless. I should mention too how they got into jingle writing was 7-Up had a contest to say, who write our next jingle, and Don and Tom came up with the Uncola song and presented it, and it won. And my understanding is they each got a check for $10,000, and they said, yeah, jingle writing, that's a much better gig. So it was one of the many factors as to why the Cyrkle broke up in early '68.
You'd be surprised how many people get into jingle writing. Barry Manilow did a lot of it. So
yeah, I mean, and as somebody who does a lot of, as you mentioned, I've worked with a lot of rock and roll bands, but I also do a lot of event photography here in Charlotte. It is interesting sometimes you work with the biggest bands of the world and you're lucky to make gas money, and then you go and photograph something for a bank and you're making more money than you ever expected somebody to give you a check for. So that is the yin and yang, creativity over something that might allow you to pay for the house. So it makes more sense in the create. And I think also Don and Tom were ready to move on to the next thing. They were restlessly creative people, and Don still is.
Okay. Well, at the end of the show, we're going to talk about another band who you've been working on a project with, and that's the Left Banke. But first, let's do our Fab Five. And so anyone who hasn't followed this on my channel, if you're not familiar with it, that's when I ask my guests to name 5 albums, 1 from each solo Beatle, 1 from the group, that are the albums that you're listening to the most right now, what I call your go-to albums. They don't have to be your favorite from each or from the Beatles. They don't have to be what you consider to be the best. It's just what you feel like hearing today.
Yeah.
If you didn't have to think about it, if you were to go on a trip right now and you wanted to take a CD from each of the Beatles right now to play in the car, or a Beatles one, what would it be? So why don't we start first of all with George for you?
And that's an easy one. All Things Must Pass. That record, and I really fell in love with that record all over again the last 2 years. I mean, we've all been through a journey, and sometimes physically and mentally, and that record's a journey. That is George's journey from, I'm a part of this big thing, but I think I can be something more, to becoming something more. And you hear that in those songs. And a friend of mine recently gifted me the songbook that was released in 1970. It has like George's drawings in the middle. And it's just like, that record is otherworldly. Is it the best post-Beatles solo album? It might be, especially when you consider, to me, All Things Must Pass is a double album with a bonus disc. It's not a 3-record set. It's like, it's 2 records and more, because that's where George's head was. But I mean, I will admit, and not every gallery is going to want to know this, that I exhibit at is every time I close a show, I play Isn't It a Pity at full volume. Because for me, that's the moment. It's that, okay, this show is ending, I need to move on. And that song, as sad as it is a sound of someone moving on. So yeah, at some point, and I should mention I'm exhibiting in Shelby, North Carolina right now with a collection of Avett Brothers photos, who I've worked with for many years. So at some point, Isn't It a Pity is going to get cranked really loud in that place. Just hopefully not anytime soon.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, all things must pass. How can you not be blown away by that collection of songs? You know, we can all debate what the greatest solo Beatle album is, but it's hard to argue the fact that the only thing better than one great album are two great albums.
Yeah,
So, and plus you got the Apple Jam, which I do believe is just a bonus. But
yeah,
song for song, I never understood fully why we needed two versions of Isn't It a Pity, although I do like the more stripped down version that's on the second album. But all
yeah,
those other songs are just so incredibly wonderful,
yeah,
and it's really getting you more in touch with George's spirituality at full blast here through two
yeah.
albums. And it's amazing. The production was fantastic, what George worked on with Phil Spector. Are there certain songs, most of all, from All Things Must Pass that touch you the most?
Oh gosh, isn't a pity. Been listening to Beware of Darkness recently. I mean,
Mm,
oh my God, that is it's heavy stuff. I always love Apple Scruffs. I discovered Apple Scruffs on a B-side. I think it was the What Is Life 45. It's like, oh, what's that? Well, that's cool. And
mhm,
that, I mean, especially now that with having heard the box set, I mean, just these songs were coming out of George's ears. It's just like it's just this endless array of, oh, I could do this, I could do that. And it's just like, oh my gosh. And I know George kind of went off the Phil Spector production, but I think on this record at that moment it works. It's George telling you this is me widescreen. And
mm.
there's one song I think you posed this question on another show recently, Ken, was what song of the Beatles that Elvis should have done. And this song, "A Waiting on You All," I would have paid good money to see the Elvis 1970 James Burton band kick "A Waiting on You All." That would have been awesome. So and to hear that with that echo, it's like you can't hear that any other way. So yeah, it's a All Things Must Pass is just endless dive of wonderfulness of somebody who accepted he was George Harrison, totally recreated his own guitar sound, went with a slide guitar, which we
Mhm.
all know and love now. We absolutely forget that George only just, put that sound together after ending his time in the biggest band in the world. And I mean, gutsy, willing to say, I'm going for this. I always say my favorite phrase is, you're doing this or you're not. And he was doing it. So God bless him.
Yeah, even though he had Wonderwall music and electronic sound before that, to start, as far as his pop albums are
Yeah.
concerned, with a double album, or if you want to look at it as a triple album, it's kind of like what Chicago did. What a
Yeah.
way to start, your solo career here for George. That was extremely gutsy.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving me credit about the question about Elvis Presley, but that wasn't me. But
Ah,
it's actually a very good question, considering the fact that Elvis was a great gospel singer too.
yeah.
So would he have been into some of George's stuff? Maybe not talking about Krishna necessarily, but
Yes.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's another alternate, reality. What would have happened if Elvis could have had the choice, and if Colonel Parker had not been saying, okay, well, if you're going to record it, I got to have the publishing, which is the reason why he never recorded any Jimmy Webb songs. I mean, and Elvis played many Jimmy Webb songs live, and he never recorded them because Jimmy correctly was not going to give up his publishing. He was Jimmy Webb, darn it.
Hmm.
So would Elvis have rocked out some Elvis to some John Lennon? I mean, Elvis doing "I Found Out," or I mean, there's a lot of what ifs in Elvis's life, and for me, that's always been, especially when he went on the road again with James Burton, with that TCB band. It's like, okay, there was so much more that he could have done that I think circumstances didn't allow him to do, and that's one of them.
You could see him singing Lennon lyrics. You know,
I would love
I've
to have
seen
seen that. I mean,
religion from Jesus to Paul, and you could
maybe
see him
not
on.
that so much, but remember, even John was rediscovering his rock and roll roots in the 70s.
Hmm.
In a lot of those songs, including all the way, obviously rock and roll and some of the latter stuff, but like you hear so much 50s influence in those songs, and you'd certainly hear it in Plastic Ono Band.
Hmm.
So what if Elvis says, "Oh, I like that one." So you never know. Or would John have written him a couple of songs like John wrote "Do the Oz," and like John's is side project songs, his one-offs he did are just fascinating, and they like I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Elephant's Memory Band, but the stuff that John did with them sounded really good.
Hmm.
And so again, it's another what if we can always ponder.
Right. 50s music was always in the back of John's mind anyway. It
It
was always
never
a part of him.
There's a part of John that stayed in that first year or two of rock and roll when into his mind, skiffle wasn't just skiffle anymore, it was rock and roll. It became rock and roll, and it was from America, and it was white, it was black, and it was all these things that he loved, and I think that love never left him.
Yeah. I think of songs like Tight
Yeah,
as being
yeah,
very 50s. Move Over Ms. L is very Chuck Berry, all over
yeah,
the place. And of course, Just Like Starting Over.
yeah. With
So,
that little hiccup, that Elvis / Buddy Holly
right.
nod. Yeah, love it, love
Hmm.
it.
Okay. Let's move on to Ringo.
Again, it is probably his best known record, but I will say Ringo. It's 1973. I mean, it's so concise. I mean, you've got obviously the other star on that record is George Harrison, but man, what George brings to the table, co-writing or essentially writing Photograph, which may be the top 10 post Beatles songs. That's a fantastic song,
Well, it's a
and
co-write. It's a
it
co-write.
is.
Yeah.
And also Sunshine Life for Me. I mean, all right,
Hmm.
two of the Beatles getting down with the band. I mean, Say No More. That just did my heart a world of good the first time I heard that.
Right.
And it was not featured in the Get Back, but there's this beautiful moment. I think it's on January 3rd, where George talks about hanging out with the band. He's like, "Oh, Ringo, they liked your song the best." That's their favorite on the White Album. It's like,
Right.
and here 5 years later, here they are recording together. 4 years later, recording together.
Yeah.
So yeah.
In
So
fact, all Things Must Pass, the song, was very influenced by the band.
yes. Again, it would have been fascinating. I mean, there were so many people who were like, when the band's debut album, Music from Big Pen, came out in '68, they drew so much attention, and partially that was because they weren't touring, because Rick Danko had a car accident. It wasn't that far from home, so they did Woodstock. But a lot of people came to see them, like Eric Clapton came to hang out with them. Dylan was obviously around. George
Hmm.
Harrison comes around. And Garth Hudson once said something, and I got to hang out one night with Garth Hudson, which was just a mind-blowing experience. And he said the band changed once we left Woodstock. Once we left Big Pink, it was a
Hmm.
different group. And that essentially is true. But think about, okay, George spends another week in Woodstock, goes down the basement and cuts a whole other set of songs with the band. I don't know if I think they just jammed. I don't think anything was recorded, but if Garth had that gear set up, what would that have been like?
Hmm.
George, obviously probably would have been writing songs or saying, "Oh, I've got this, I've got that." I think also George loved the the all is one, all for one ethos of the band at that
Right.
point. You had three writers, you had three singers. Everybody is a key contributor, and for someone like George, who was fighting to get his ideas into the biggest band in the world, that was very intriguing. And that's kind of overshadows a bit that first week of Get Back, where you see him like, "Oh, I was there and now I'm back here."
Hmm.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that does change. That time with the band definitely changed George's thinking.
Okay. Spotlight some of the songs. Obviously, Photograph to me is a masterpiece. Sometimes I even think it could be the best solo Beatles single.
Yeah.
In terms of song and production, it was so masterfully produced by Richard Perry. But
Yeah.
other songs from you that you really like the most from the album?
I mean, obviously I have to mention I'm the Greatest, which is also beautiful because it's John, George, Ringo, Billy Preston, and Claus Vorman.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's as close to a Beatle reunion as we ever got. And for those of us who have had the outtakes, it's interesting to hear John kind of take over the band again and say, "This is how we're going to do this song."
Hmm.
So It's out there. It's definitely worth checking. But you hear them work up to the speed that John wants to have them, because it's John on piano and Ringo on drums. So it's John who's leading that take to say, okay, this is the sound I want for this. So it's more work than you might have thought if you heard the recording later on. And also Ringo's songs on side 2, some of the songs he wrote with Vinnie Poncia, I mean, really solid. I mean, it's just, and I have to mention 6 O'Clock,
Yes.
which you know, I mean, it's like side 1 has all the John stuff, Best of the George stuff, and then right in the middle of side 2, here's this thing from McCartney. He and Linda just, it's like they walked in the studio and said here and just released it. And you know, it's a whole other world for 5 minutes on side 2.
Well, the other Beatles knew how to write for Ringo, and
Yes, they did.
it shows very much, except Cooking in the Kitchen of Love, which you know, I mean, it's still okay, but all the other songs, I think that the others wrote for him were fine. And 6 O'Clock is, you know, along with Photograph, to me, the best of the bunch. You know, and I love I'm the Greatest and Goodnight Vienna as well. But yeah, but George is very, very prevalent on the album. But like you were saying, I think part of what makes this album work is that there are songs that don't have any Beatles on them other than Ringo. And they're fine. I mean, Oh My was written Ringo with Vinnie Poncia, and Devil Woman. And Have You Seen My Baby, which is a Randy Newman song. Great tune.
Yeah.
You know, there's some of the best tracks on the album. The whole album is solid. So
I think people obviously gravitated to the hits, but you know, it showed for the first, you know, I do like Boko of Blues. I do love that Ringo's the one who went to Nashville and said, I'm making a Dylan record. Let's go. And that's a really good record, but it really showed that Ringo could be more than just the drummer of the Beatles. You know, obviously he'd been having hits by that point. He'd had some success, but as a full-blown album recording solo star, that's the record where I think Ringo really emerged. And he's still out there. You know, I have to say, I really like the new EPs that Ringo has been releasing. And I think he's learned that there was a magic on that record and pieces of his other record in the 70s. I think he's said, okay, let's go for that again. And I've enjoyed what he's created.
A lot of people wish he would make an all country album again, but he's never done that. So
I think Dave Stewart tried to push him into it and he just wasn't ready. But you know, if Ringo came out with it next week, I'd buy it immediately. So,
there's something about his voice and his delivery where he's so suitable for country music. And I remember learning that people in the country field were very much aware of Buku of Blues when it came out. Ken Mansfield had told me that. And Ringo is an avid lover of country music, and you know, all the outlaw stuff that came out in the 70s, and Ken Mansfield had to go and buy records for Ringo and ship them out over to England because he was following some of that stuff. So I wish he would work more with country artists, you know.
I would love to hear that too. It's something about his voice and his understanding of the song. I mean, much as I love, you know, Act Naturally by Buck Owens, I mean, the job that Ringo does on that song. I mean, and then with Paul doing the Don Rich high harmony, it's just like, oh my God, that's killer. And I heard the Buck Owens version recently and I had to retrain myself to sing because Ringo sings the lead line differently than Buck Owens, but he nails it. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of talent in that band. You know, we're still you know, picking up the bits and pieces of things like this that we've forgotten about.
Yeah, you never stop learning about the Beatles.
True, that's part of the fun.
Well, speaking of the group, right here, sandwiched in the middle of our show, now you're going to pick your Beatles album.
You know, Abbey Road was the record that I fell in love with when I was a child, and I always, some days that is my favorite, but day in, day out, I will say Revolver. Revolver to me is an astounding achievement, particularly because they were essentially 6 to 9 months ahead of that curve when that record came out, and people were not ready for it. They were still reeling from all the things they've been through and the Jesus comments, and it's like But at the same time, people were still, obviously music was progressing. That period of 64 to 68, music progressed at a rate that we hadn't seen before, and maybe not seen since. But for the Beatles, people were still expecting the Beatles to still be in rubber soul mode, and then they take it to Revolver, which is really like, okay, we're all bets are off, and let's see what we can do in the studio. I always say you can't have Pepper without Revolver. Revolver is them really falling in love with what can we do with these songs in the studio, and they really went for it. And it's amazing to think about that. In, I think it was 6 weeks, they came up with those songs plus Paperback Writer and Rain. I mean, and they were creating and growing so fast. I don't think they even saw it. I mean, because they'd only finished Rubber Soul in December 60 or November 65. So to them, it was, I think George said, oh, it was like, part one, part two. And if you look at the timeline, that kind of makes sense. But they were growing so fast, and suddenly George is coming up with these amazing more songs and like bringing them to the band. It's like they were growing so fast they couldn't see it. They were just trying to get through the next gig. They were just trying to get through the next country without getting killed. And sometimes creativity comes out of chaos, and it comes out of the need to create something that takes your mind away from what you're dealing with at that moment. For me, that's Revolver. And I mean, it's amazing to think about the people heard Revolver and went, oh my God, this is weird, this is crazy. But throughout fall and early 66, early 67, you start to hear the influence of Revolver. And meanwhile, the Beatles have already moved on. I always say that with Pepper, people had finally caught up to the Beatles by June 1st of 67. Psychedelia had been happening. People started to, hear, okay, there's something happening. And then Peppers comes out 2 weeks before Monterey. And it's like the perfect record at the perfect moment. But it wasn't so much the Beatles caught up to the audience caught up to the Beatles. And that's always been one of my theories about that, why that record was received the way it was. But it's interesting, you go back and read the reviews of Revolver and like, well, this is weird, they've got this, they've got that. It's like people were not really ready yet to think about the Beatles moving so far beyond I Want to Hold Your Hand, which they obviously left in the dust. 2 years was a long time in Beatle terms.
Oh yeah, very well said, Daniel. I've talked here on my channel very often about that quote from George Harrison, that this was Rubber Soul parts one and two, and it's like, are you out of your mind? It's like, I can understand his thinking behind it, but when you think about how much they just completely spread out and did so many different styles of music masterfully. I mean, I still think, and you can apply this to so many Beatles songs, like people say, how could Paul have written something so mature like Yesterday when he was 23, 22, 23 when that came out, or John writing In My Life so young. And here's George Harrison writing Love You Too and Within You Without You, and look how young he was writing that stuff. But to be able to mix in all the Indian instruments and have a mind for that and how it would work, that's brilliant. And was there anything that sounded like so many of the songs that were on Revolver prior to that? Maybe a gradual change, like Yesterday to Eleanor Rigby, and what else?
Well, a good example is for George is you go from Norwegian Wood to Love You Too. And that's a huge jump in 5 months. In
some ways it kind of makes sense that even though the single was Yellow Submarine and Eleanor Rigby was so advanced for what they were doing, but Yellow Submarine is such an easy song to love and to sing along with. That was but it's a shame that song got the spotlight there as a single when there are all these advances being made in the studio, from all these other songs like Tomorrow Never Knows and She Said and For No One and all this stuff.
Robert and in a really nice alternate universe, they released Tomorrow Never Knows as a single, and people just lost their minds. But I think it was Tomorrow Never Knows is almost like the song you drop at the end of the record and say, oh, by the way, this. And I think that just hit people like a brick. I mean, it's like, yeah, I mean, this, you know, it's definitely the new Beatles album. It's got all these things, and then that song comes on, and you're just like, what did we just walk into?
Mhm.
And that's for me one of the beauties of that record. It's like whatever you thought of the Beatles then or now, well, it just changed again.
Mm. It's like another universe, and it
Totally,
really foreshadowed Sergeant Pepper. Tomorrow Never Knows, as far
very
as I'm
much so.
concerned.
Yeah, I mean, think about tomorrow. You get Tomorrow Never Knows to A Day in the Life. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, can't have one without the other. But man, again, 6 8 months later, just astounding.
It's
Just
amazing.
yeah,
It stops me in my tracks till still to this day.
yeah,
Revolver.
yeah.
All right. How about John next?
I will, to my mind, Imagine is definitely maybe the most. I would never say that
Commercial?
John made a pop album, but
Mm.
Imagine is definitely the most cohesive in terms of his different sounds. But for me, is the record you say, okay, one record from John, Plastic Ono Band. I mean, you know, it's been said before, the whole punk before punk, but oh my God, I mean, and to think about that, as John's making this record, Yoko's making a record the same time with Klaus, with Ringo, and they pulled in Ornette Coleman and Dodd and Cherry on one song, and
Mhm.
so they were just okay, you know. And Billy Preston's on a couple of songs, but like those songs are so just, you know, the, it's like there's no veneer for John at that point, like Working Class Hero and then God, you know. I mean, this it's like this is me right now at this moment. This is me and Yoko, take it or leave it. And I also think John sometimes, you know, John just wanted to get on with it. He didn't want to labor things in the studio. And I definitely think that's the best of John just saying, I'm just going to go in and cut an album. Here we go. Whether or not Phil Spector is there for the sessions or not, which is still open for debate, it's still, you know, it's John's guts and influence saying this is me at this moment. You know, I think John was often said he, you know, he wanted to sing the news, he wanted to say this is me in the moment, this is what's going on, and that record is so much John in that moment. And again, it's like, you know, play God at full volume and you're just like, okay, this is, you know, I think we've all had that moment in our life. You say, okay, everything else goes out the window, it's just me, and it just comes back to me, or you know, I can move on to whatever comes next. It's interesting that as John, this is John's statement of I'm moving forward, and George had his own statement of moving forward
Mhm.
with All Things Must Pass, and that took a little while for Paul to get there himself for a variety of reasons, and that also that eventually will work into my Paul album.
Hmm.
But I think you're hearing how John and George on their own records are working through their own grief of what do we do now? I mean, as much as it was, I think they were all ready to, or at least John and George were ready to call time on the Beatles. That was traumatic for all of them.
Sure.
And you know that their life was in that band, and while you're ready to go on and create your own thing, it's not easy. So you hear on those songs like God and Isn't It a Pity, that's the sound of two amazing artists moving forward. So I think those records to me correlate a little more than some people might think.
You said that this is John saying, "This is where I'm at now,"
Yeah,
but couldn't you say John was always that way? Every single album of his was a personal statement of what he was going through, whether it's being separated from Yoko,
yeah,
you can hear depression, in a lot of John's stuff
yeah.
on Walls and Bridges. It reflects that, John's stuff was so deeply personal,
Yeah.
some
I
songs
think
more, but
I think he always and I think Plastic Ono Band was the record he had to make at that moment before he could say, okay, I'm going to keep going with these ideas, but I need, I want to find different people to play with. Some records have strings, some records have 30 people on them in New York City. Some people, it's like John was always a singular artist and a singular voice. But for me, Plastic Ono Band is maybe because of the bass drums setup, it's just so stripped down and just like three guys in a room just kicking it out, which is the thing what John really wanted at that moment. He just wanted to be in a rock and roll band again. So but to your point, yes, John always said his mind on record, but there's something about that moment when he recorded Plastic Ono Band. It's like, okay, I'm sure it was very liberating for him to say, or Mother. I mean, you know, you open the record with Mother, you know, that was it, Mama Don't Go, Daddy Come Home. I mean,
Right.
wow, you know, and then you end with God. I mean, that's heavy stuff, and doing it with in a trio format, you know. So yeah, that's the record I will sometimes hear different places, and you know, he was pulling in, you know, songs that he'd written for the Beatles a couple years before, but it just works on that record.
Right.
Love, you know, that song, Oh My Love is no, Oh My Love
All
is
I
on
love is Imagine. Love
yeah,
is
there's
on Plastic Ono Band.
right, but oh my God, I mean, the lyrics of Love are just so like on the you know, again, the Beatles did this thing where you hear and go, wow, that's simplistic, but it's so layered and textured, and like the songs to love, the lyrics to Love, and just over that piano melody is just so affecting, you know. Then you know, something that we just want to be loved. I mean, what a statement. So all on a pop record. So there you go.
Yeah, John had this incredible ability to have simple lyrics that pack a lot of punch and say
Yeah,
something that everybody can relate to.
yeah.
I always love to bring up How, which is one of those songs that I think it's one of his greatest songs in his solo
Yeah,
career that people tend to overlook. How can I go
agree.
forward when I don't know which way I'm facing? How can I
Yeah,
give love when I don't know what it is I'm giving? I mean,
yeah,
wow.
yeah.
Uh, it's
So
incredible. But you know, it's such a raw, intense album, Plastic
mhm,
Ono Band. This is an album you can always turn to as one that you feel like listening to, as a
yeah,
go-to album today, you know, because it's so emotional and so raw that it's not a party album, you know.
no. You kind of have to be in the right mindset sometimes. I would say don't listen to Plastic Ono Band if you're having a really bad day, because it
Yeah.
brings out a lot of heavy emotion. But it's like, I think, you know, especially again over the last couple of years, I've had this moment where I just want to play that and All Things Must Pass, you know, very loud at different times, and just say I'm going to get myself through this, hell or high water. So you know, I think that both records still speak to us because of that feeling of I'm going to get through this, no matter what is going on. I'm going to get myself through this, and
Mm.
and that emotion never goes away. That never gets old. That statement of purpose, in fact, just like those songs, lives forever.
Okay, let's go to our last Beatle, and that's Paul.
If you had asked me 2, 3 years ago, I probably would have said Band on the Run, or I do like Flowers in the Dirt. I think there's some amazing songs. I loved hearing the demos that Paul did with Elvis Costello.
Mhm.
Man, they turned out a nice purple patch of songs in that short period. But as Ram was reissued last year for its 50th anniversary,
Mhm.
I really dove into that record again. It's definitely one of the records that has been in my head the last 2 years, and I just really, and again, it's that, you know, I know some people have said, you know, Ram is Sergeant Paul. It's this, you know, I'll make the case that maybe Ram is George's. I mean, it's Paul's All Things Must Pass. You know, it's the I've got all these ideas. I've got to figure out how to put them together. And obviously George, with the people he's working with, it was going to come out one way. Paul, the people he was working with, was going to come out a different way.
Mhm.
But I mean, that the scope of those songs and all those, you know, and it's also Paul finding new voices. There's a ton of voices, you know, Monkberry Moon Delight and all these different things that he, you know, maybe on "Oh Darling" he suggested it, but it's like these songs were becoming full-blown characters, which he then would revisit all through the 70s and into the 80s. So it was like Paul finding a new way to sing and write through this record. And I finished a show last year in Mount Airy, and I literally had my car full of about 70 pictures, and I'm going down Highway 52 and I'm listening to Ram, and you get to backseat of my car. And I don't think I've ever played any song as loud as when they get to the we believe that we can't be wrong.
Mhm.
I mean, again, I know some people thought that took that as trite. It's definitely or the what's Paul on about? Well, that's a statement of purpose. That's and I think people took that because of the way they viewed Paul and Linda as having broken up the Beatles. That's somebody saying, this is us now. It's just that whereas John, harkened more back to Larry Williams and Elvis, and George was pulling at different things. Paul was going back to his loves, Brian Wilson. Some of the folk stuff that he got into in the late 60s is like, Ram is all those Paul's head in everything that's bouncing off the walls. That correct me if I'm wrong, that record took a while, and it was like 2 different sets of sessions. It took several months to pull that record together. And it actually had several songs that ended up, a few more songs that ended up on Red Rose Speedway a few years later.
Right.
So
2 of them.
Yeah. Paul is, it's almost like Paul is, you can hear Paul figuring out, does this song go with this one? It's like, it's Paul basically putting the pieces back together, of himself and what he could do on an album. So right now, Ram is Ram on,
Yeah,
ukulele and all.
I tell you, from watching the Get Back documentary and seeing how much creativity is pouring out of Paul McCartney at that moment.
Yeah.
And then you take a look at, and this is really, and I've discussed this here on my channel, there are lots of moments in Paul's solo career where he's amazingly prolific. And the stuff that he puts out on his album is half the material or even less than what he's working on. And there's songs that he's working on here at the end of 1970, like I Lie Around or Little Woman Love, that end up as B-sides. There's so much stuff that wasn't released at the time that ends up getting on the Ram archival box set. It's incredible how much what was going on in that brain of his. He had so many ideas, and in many ways, you follow what he was doing as he was growing in the Beatles, and he was doing so many different styles. Look at what Paul was doing on the White Album. So many different styles of music. How different is Ram in that regard? He's bouncing all over the place, and some of the songs are kind of serious. Maybe Dear Boy, you might look at as being somewhat serious, and then there's something goofy, like Smile Away, or Monkberry Moon Delight. Too Many People is more serious, which he later admitted was directed towards John and Yoko. So and vocally, I think it could be his finest album.
I mean, any song that Paul wants to do, he can do it, and he's doing it on that record. I think some of the silly lyrics was where his brain was, but also I think it was his way of dealing with the heaviness of going on around them. They always say, like, sometimes you create the goofiest stuff when you're absolutely exhausted, you're having a bad day, you're just like, one of my many current, past, former lives was comedy writing. And I always wrote some of the best, most out there stuff at like 1, 2 in the morning, was half asleep. And suddenly this idea popped in my head. And it's like, it was just my way of it's like, I've been at school too long. I'm going to go play in this sandbox here for a while. I'm going to enjoy it before I absolutely fall over. And, I think some of that was Paul's way of dealing with the court case and being no longer leading the Beatles. So, but yeah, again, I think that record has benefited a lot from time. Obviously, as you know, Ken, that record did not get a lot of great reviews when it came out. People came with knives out. because, oh, he broke up the Beatles, I gotta hate everything Paul does. And they totally missed what for me is the record that Paul said, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere, and I'm going to keep moving just like my friends did, just like John and George and Ringo will. And it's all there on Ram. And then you hear that progression piece by piece through what became Wings and then through the 70s.
Yeah, well, I hate to be repetitive here, but we've tackled this subject, and I love hearing different opinions about Ram, but it is fascinating to me how so many people now are thinking of it as his best album or close
Yeah.
to it. And for someone like myself, where I think Paul's made 10 or 11 albums that I consider to be truly great, Ram is one of them. I've never placed it as number one, but I've always recognized it from the very beginning as being brilliant. But now, especially with remastering and all, and it's so wonderfully produced.
Yeah.
And this is Paul doing what he does best, writing infectious melodies, great arrangements to his songs. Uncle Albert, Admiral Halsey.
Yeah.
I mean, how brilliant was that? With the arrangement, actually, what was coming from the orchestra from George Martin scoring
Yeah.
that.
And
So
yeah, and wasn't it? I learned this in the last year. I always had assumed that it was like 3 different takes. And apparently, that was all one song that they recorded the backing track together in the studio. It's like it's like Paul's thing of like 3 different songs together, but they were recorded together. That wasn't a recording trick. You think, oh, this is so amazing, it must all have been spliced together. No, that backing track was live.
right.
So that tells you that Paul was much more together and much more willing to experiment than some people were willing to give him credit for when that song came out.
Yeah. I tell you, when I hear the remastered Ram,
Hmm.
especially on a really good sound system, it blows you away.
Yeah.
It really does. And there is something to be said, and we had a discussion on Talk More Talk, one of my podcasts. Is Paul better when he's self-produced or when he has other producers working with him? And you got different opinions there, because it's not so easy to just say, obviously, when he does it himself, he's better, because there's so many skillful producers that can add so much and bring so many ideas to the table. But there are people who love the pure McCartney, hate to use that term, but that
Hmm.
sound. And he had his own stamp. He had his own sound in the 70s, when almost everything that he put out was self-produced.
Yeah.
Except for Chris Thomas or George Martin here and there, but most of it was produced by Paul.
Yeah. I mean, Paul knew what he wanted. I think sometimes he did need that other, maybe it was not producer, but to have Jeff Emmerich or someone else to say, what about this?
Engineers.
What about, yeah, I think,
Yeah.
and that has to be hard when you're Paul McCartney and you say, oh, I'm the guy that does all this. I have done all this, but sometimes accept that you need another set of ears to say, oh, what about this? What about that? And on Ram, you have Jim Guercio, you have Denny Sywell and Hugh McCracken, and Spinoza.
David Spinoza in the beginning.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I mean, he's bouncing stuff off them, and in a way that evolved as Wings became Wings, and then Paul became more of a solo artist. So I think it depends on the record for me. To that question, that is a good question. I think it depends on where Paul's head is at and the songs, because I would have loved to have heard Flowers in the Dirt, just the album that he and Elvis Costello would have made in '89. Obviously, Paul ended up making a different record with different people and different sound, but it's wherever Macca is and whatever group of songs he has in his bag. I think that is the ultimate decider.
Yeah, I do think that, and this is based on a number of people that I've spoken to that have worked with Paul. He has some very definite ideas of what he wants, but he does welcome people adding their own opinions, and very often he takes ideas from other people.
Yeah.
So,
and you've got to stay open to that. I mean, I've worked with a lot of artists who you get it in your head, well, I'm the guy, I'm the girl, I'm that somebody that is, and yeah, your name's on the product, but you you got to listen to other people to try to create something better. You know, this Cyrkle project, these songs, is me collaborating with Don Danneman and collecting with Rusty Yannick, who's recorded a lot of our stuff in Ohio. And it's the back and forth. It's all of us contributing to try to make a better record. And I think even when you're Paul McCartney, you need to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Very good. So before we go, let's talk about this. Well, actually, it came out in February, this CD from the Left Banke. This was an album that they recorded in 1978.
Correct. It's actually, yeah. It's well, Stranger, you know, the bulk of this new CD, Strangers on a Train, is the album that the band made without Michael Brown, their main writer, the man who wrote Walk Away Renee and Pretty Ballerina. Tom Finn, who was originally the bass player, and then later jumped over to guitar. He took over a lot of the writing duties after Michael Brown left. He got a publishing deal to record a group of songs, so he pulled George and Steve back in. And the majority of this record was recorded as demos in Long Island in the spring of 1978. There are a few studio recordings they made with Michael Kamen. The idea was, okay, we'll start these and then we'll do more, you know, in a proper studio. And the record, for whatever reason, just ground to a halt. And these songs were tossed out 8 years later on, like, I think Relics Records in the US and another Bam Caruso in the UK. It never got a proper release. The original vinyl sounds pretty muddy. And so this record, this release, grew out of what was originally envisioned as a 2 CD overview of the Left Banke 1968 on. We had found a whole lot of recordings and have continued to find recordings the band made after 68 that we didn't know to exist. And they sound fantastic. And due to licensing and other issues, we decided to pair it back to the Strangers album, and then pair that with a series of recordings that Michael Brown made with Steve Martin-Caro and Tom Finn in 2001, 2002. They did 2 recording sessions, Michael and Steve, in Tampa, Florida, where Steve was living at the time. And Michael, it's been interesting now, having heard a lot of Michael's unreleased recordings. He had this amazing streak from like the late 90s up until 2006, when he stopped collaborating with other musicians, I think due to some things that were happening with him, mostly health issues. That he just, it's like, is it on a par with Walk Away Renee? It's pretty, to me, it's all, the story of Michael Brown doesn't end in 1967 with Desiree. It continues up until Michael passed away in 2015. The man never stopped writing, and he never stopped writing great songs. And you really hear that. And the fact that Steve, who, did not ever perform live after 1969, pretty much lived in Florida most of the rest of his life, never, still sounded this good 35 years later is kind of astounding. And as we were preparing this CD for release, so it's the first 10 tracks are the Strangers album from 1978 with the UK running order, because we, myself and my co-producers Scott Schinder and Cheryl Pavelski of Omnivore Recordings, just found that flow worked better and allowed you to hear that album differently than a lot of people did if they heard the US running order. And then pair that with the 0102 recordings, you don't think that songs 24 years apart would work this cohesively, but it does. And to me, that's that's the Left Banke. That's, they are for me one of my favorite bands. I had first met them, interviewed them in 2001, 2002 for the Big Takeover magazine. Stayed in touch with them, ended up working with the Tom and George Cameron version of the Left Banke from 2011 to 2013. Met Michael Brown at his final public appearance, which was the last show that Tom and George Left Banke did in 2013. And this has stayed a prized possession to me for a long time. And it's signed by George and Tom and Michael. And I stayed in touch with them and then stayed in touch with their families. So when Omnivore came to me in 2020 and said, what about a Left Banke CD? I was like, yeah. One, because the time is right. And two, I've loved what Cheryl has done with Omnivore. And I knew that she would be willing to see this project through. as some Left Banke fans will know, things were not always easy with the Left Banke. There was always a lot of arguing, a lot of creative tension. Let's say that. But these are also four guys who really cared about each other, loved each other. I always said they loved each other so much they drove each other crazy. But they really cared about the music, and
Right.
you hear that through these songs. And there's more out there. We found more recordings at the last minute from 2001, 2002. So there's more out there. Will that be released down the road? I hope so. But for me, I know that this was very important to Steve and Tom and George, that they always felt Strangers was a good record, but it never got released properly. It never sounded right. It never, got the due that it deserved. And I think that this record finally gives the record the chance to say, say it's, give it a fair shake, and people get to hear how good those songs are. And it was a 2-year process. This has definitely been one of my very intensive COVID projects over the last 2 years. But the fact that I can tell you that the record is out and you can hear it now, and you can hear Steve and Tom and George and Michael again. I knew 3 of the 4. They all still live up here. It's wonderful to know that there's somebody out there today who says, "Oh, the Left Banke, I've never heard that. Oh, there's a new record out. I'll go pick that up." I've said it a few times, Left Banke forever. And I hope this record is part of that story.
So I'm sure you feel that the band hasn't been given nearly enough credit for being, a very good band coming out
Yeah.
of the 60s. You always hear a lot about the Baroque sound that they brought to their music. Would you call them an influence on other artists? And would you call them progressive? In some ways, because sometimes, you tend to think progressive is always, yes, Genesis, Emerson, Lake and Palmer and all that. But even if you go before that, and the Moody Blues too. But, the Zombies to me were a progressive band in many ways. Sometimes people don't look at it that way because they might think of the band as being too poppy in one way.
Yeah.
Odyssey and Oracle is, a
Honestly,
whole other
it's such
direction.
an amazing jump. And that's one of my favorite records. And that's a band I got to see them do that record 4 times with Chris and Hugh.
Me too.
And oh my God. I mean, it's funny. I had this conversation once with Tom Finn. He's like, "Well, the Zombies don't really sound like us." I was like, well, to us, they do. I think Tom's idea was, well, we have our own thing. I mean, you had 3 guys. I mean, the Left Banke harmony is also fascinating, that you've got Steve on the lead vocal, one of the best vocals of the 60s. You've got George basically shadowing Steve's parts. And then you've got Tom doing the high harmony. So it is unconventional. It's basically 2 lead vocalists and a high harmony singer, but it works. Definitely pushing the envelope. I know that the Left Banke didn't consider themselves a psychedelic band. They considered themselves as much, even though they definitely got into some psychedelia on Left Banke too. I would say the Left Banke is the Left Banke. They definitely had progressive ideas that would have certainly not have been a word that they would have used back then. But they were definitely pushing something further. And the fact that Leonard Bernstein saw that and recognized that on his Inside Pop program, as well as a New York Times article he wrote, he specified Pretty Ballerina for its use of chord progression. And I mean, if he's hearing it, something's going on. And I will mention too that Donovan has relayed this story of hanging out with George Harrison, and he said George's favorite song was Walk Away Renee. So not bad.
Yeah.
So I definitely think the 60s moved so fast, and you basically had to adapt and grow or get left behind. And the Left Banke were part of that. They were 4 guys who were pushing each other to create something new and create something better. And just the way that, and again, to me, zombie fans will say, "Well, how do you describe the Left Banke?" I always say, well, they're kind of more like more melancholic American cousin to the Zombies, but it's different. It's you've got, you forget that Michael Brown was not yet 16 when he wrote Walk Away Renee, and the singers are 17. I mean, that's just unbelievable. But they're creating something that is speaking to generations. I mean, you know, they're pushing it beyond even what they were. They were just guys wanting to be in a rock and roll band and get on the radio, and yet this thing's emerged. So, you know, maybe some people will look at progressive as a 4-letter word, but it's the 60s, man. It's the 60s. It's yeah.
The Beatles are progressive as far as I'm
Oh
concerned.
God, I mean, the White Album. I mean, like, and listen to how many prog rock bands then covered the Beatles 4 years later. I mean, yeah. I mean, oh yeah, they're, you know, you had to. That's one thing I love about that period is like everybody's ears were just wide open, and it's like, okay, well, that's new. It's like, and even going back to the Beatles and Revolver, you've got them. Obviously, there's the influence of the Byrds, the extra jangle on the tambourine and Ringo sound. You have the first take of Andrew Birkenstein, which is very Byrdsy, but then it's the Beatles then going, okay, we can do this a little more our way. So it's like the Beatles, and it's the Byrds and all these bands filtered through the Beatles and then pushed forward for the next set of years.
Right.
And I think the Left Banke and the Cyrkle all did that. You know, the Cyrkle was, I think they described themselves more as folk pop, but they were getting, anyone who's not heard it, I highly recommend Neon and the Minx, which is the movie soundtrack that I mentioned, which, and the short story on that was they wrote the soundtrack and performed in the movie as it was at that point a straight drama. After it was filmed and the band broke up, the director added some scenes that you wouldn't show to your mom, and that's how they got the movie sold. So the Cyrkle did not intend to be part of that kind of movie, but it's a great soundtrack. And even just recently on this new record, I've said, we need another It's a Lovely Game, Louise. We need that song that does this inside too. So, you know, that's the beauty of that moment, and that much things in the ether, you know, and the Beatles were part of that, and obviously leading that, you know, create, grow. I mean, what a beautiful concept.
Yeah. Now with the Left Banke, sadly, all the original members have passed away now, right?
Yes. You know, Michael passed away in 2015, George passed away in 2018, and Steve and Tom passed away in 2020. And I always said this record for me was my way of dealing with those guys passing away. The fact that I wasn't going to get another series of crazy emails at 2 a.m. from Tom or George emailing me at another crazy time, go, hey man, how are you doing? And, you know, it's like, I always say that those guys live on in song and they live up here. And I think that's a sign of a really good artist. You know, if they become a part of you physically and mentally, then they're doing something right.
Yeah. Isn't it true that Walk Away Renee and Pretty Ballerina were both written in the same day?
Not same week or two. Tom brought in his girlfriend at the time was Renee Fladen, and Mike saw her and a whole bunch of things went off in his mind, and he wrote Walk Away Renee, Pretty Ballerina, and She May Call You Up Tonight in pretty much within 2 or 3 weeks. And that's, you know, again, he's not yet 16, but you know, he's only been in a band for a few months. You know, all of them, you know, Steve, Tom, and George had been playing in other groups, but for all of them, the Left Banke was their first band. I mean, in many ways, it was their first band. And think about that. Think about your first band, and think about creating songs like that at those ages. That's, you know, but they had the songs and they had the voices and they had the goods. So yeah, I mean,
it's amazing to write songs that good.
Yeah,
at 16 or 15, 16.
And despite all the, you know, there was the whole thing with members leaving, getting kicked out, coming back in. Michael leaves, Michael comes back, leaves again, and then the band, you know, Tom Finn emerges as a writer, and they go on to create Left Banke 2, which for me is actually a more cohesive record than their first album, Walk Away Renee, Pretty Ballerina. And it doesn't hit the highs of Walk Away Renee, but it's a really great listen. And I got to enjoy Tom Finn coming to terms and going, you know what, that's a really good record. because when it came out in 68, 69, and it didn't do the business that Way Renee had, he just figured, it's a bad record, it's a bum record, and we all failed. And then over the period of time that I knew Tom, it was like, yeah, that's a great record. Wow, people really like that record. And part of the joys too of working with that 2011, 2012 Left Banke was when the Left Banke went on the road in 66, 67, 68, they did a couple dates with the Beach Boys, but they mostly were thrown out doing, bars, high school shows and this and that. They didn't usually play their own songs live because they were like, we can't hear ourselves, we don't have the strings. So my understanding is Steve and George were huge Rolling Stones fans, so they played a lot of Stones covers. They would play whatever they wanted to play and then play their singles. So all of us who got to enjoy the 2011 Left Banke with Tom and George and Mike Fornital on lead vocals got to hear those songs literally performed live for the first time ever. And that was something none of us thought was ever going to happen. So I always say, I never thought I'd see the Left Banke live. I saw them 6 times. I never thought, and then after that, producing an album or co-producing a reissue of theirs doesn't seem that implausible.
Yeah. Just so you know, the woman who became my wife actually went on a date with Steve Martin.
Really?
When she was 15. Very innocent. She was into the rock bands of the time in the DC area. There were bands like the English Setters. There was some kind of a party where it was all bands that had the same management. And she got to meet the Left Banke and Steve Martin. And, they went around the DC area and visited, certain sites there. It was nothing to write home about. But for a 15-year-old girl, it was really exciting.
Oh, so, man. There's not a lot of stories, and sadly, along with the guys, we've lost a lot of the people that saw the Left Banke live. So I'm thrilled to hear that I'd love to hear more of her story sometime. Okay. And the Left Banke, people in media, especially more recent, people, they all argued. It's like they could be very nurturing. Their fan club presidents, Cookie and Carrie, and Cookie still leads the Facebook page. Wow. She has amazing stories. I mean, they were 16, 17, and how nice and supportive the Left Banke were with them. I mean, that's just great, heartwarming stories.
Yeah. And
not every rock star was like that, but yeah, it's always nice to hear stories like that, because here's this band who's out playing for 15-year-olds, playing. I know one point they got sent out to Detroit to open for the Temptations at Cobo Hall. Would love to have seen that. I know they did one show where they opened for Mamas and Papas, and nice. I think they opened 3 or 4 shows for the Beach Boys, and it was like Beach Boys, Electric Prunes, Keith, and the Left Banke. Yeah, I wish I could have seen that show. Yeah.
Boy, if you're opening for those acts, you'd think this was a band that would want to stay together as much as possible.
Well, and again, that's the very complicated story is also they, a lot of the guys Left Banke were still learning their instruments when they got pushed out on the road. And eventually they did learn to play. The Left Banke 2 is essentially all the Left Banke, with the exception of a couple of songs where Michael Brown, on his songs, he brought in backing musicians who had played on the first Left Banke record. But even on the first Left Banke album, Let Go of You Girl, that's the full lineup of Steve, Tom, George, Michael, and Rick Brand, who was he was not the original guitarist, but he was the guitarist that was pictured on the album.
Right.
So a few people have asked, are you going to write the Left Banke story? That's a complicated story to write. It needs to be told. I'm still recovering from getting this release out. But I think, I kind of go into this with a lot of these creative projects. I was thinking, it's like the Cyrkle. Somebody says, I say to myself, I would like to see somebody do this. I'd like to see somebody create this. And then you reach a point in your life, you say, well, why not me? And I think I've approached a lot of my projects that way. Is like, you know what? I want to create this because I want to see it, and hopefully it will find an audience later. You really, you have to create the things that you like as both a fan and a listener, and that's been a big part of what's driven me to do this project with the Cyrkle and the Left Bank.
Yeah. All right. Before we go, just want to clear up one thing about Michael Brown.
Mhm.
He joined the Stories later on.
Yes, he did. He's the piano player on the first two albums, but he's not on Brother Louie.
Yep.
Some things happened, and I know that that song was pitched to them, and Michael, Michael was very Michael wanted to do his songs and was not really open throughout his career. I mean, kudos to him for saying, this is the music I've written, this is the music I want to play. And I think he saw that song as pop. So he left the band, and then the band recorded Brother Louie without him. Now, the B-side was written by Michael Brown. That was a song that they had done before Michael left. So Michael's song, is on that single, but it's not on the A-side.
Still
So
made good money from it, I'm sure.
yeah, and those two Storia records are really good. And Ian Lloyd on bass and vocals, and actually a song from their first album, I'm Coming Home, hit the charts. I think it hit the top 50.
Right.
Those are really good records. All the records that Michael made are worth checking out. The Becky's record that he made later with Jimmy McAllister, who became the guitarist on Strangers on a Train, that's a good record. And there's about 28 demos that we have found that actually came to me through Jimmy McAllister many years ago, and Jimmy passed away many years ago. They did demos both before and after that record, which is as good, if not better, than the Becky's album that was released. And Tom Finn actually sings backup on a couple of them. And you hear him open that, you hit that chorus, and like, oh, there it is. There's Michael, there's Tom. So yeah, I mean, that's the great thing about the Left Banke and all this music we're discussing. It's an endless dive. I always, people say, oh, aren't you tired of this? Don't you want to be done? I said, no, we found with the Left Banke alone, we found so many recordings that I didn't know to exist 2 years ago. And there's still 2 more collections I'm trying to get my hands on as we're talking here. So yeah, I mean, it's just like life, man. Keep going, keep creating, keep finding more cool stuff.
Well, you're certainly getting me more into this music than I already was. So
Thank
we're
you.
going to have to provide links here in our description box for the Left Banke and the Cyrkle. And as I did say, Don Daneman will be at the fest.
Yes.
If you're watching this before the fest happens, only on the Sunday, which is April 3rd, 2022. Yes. And this has been tremendous, Dan. Thanks for being here.
Yeah,
and we'll have you on again, talking Beatles. Let us know what's going on with all your latest projects.
I will definitely too. And thank you for, obviously I've been listening to you a lot for a long time. Your interview with Peter Jackson was mind blowing. That was, I always say, some people say, oh, you get lost in the weeds. Well, sometimes even deeper than the weeds is way more fun. And that interview was so much deeper than the weeds, but man, there was so much stuff I got out of the interview that, again, this is endless, and it should be endless. It should be, you never want this to end. More. So kudos to you for what you're doing as well.
Thank you. The great thing about that interview is that you may not have absorbed everything that was said, so you have to keep going back and watching it over and over and over again, and you learn so much. I mean, Peter Jackson couldn't have been nicer. I like to tell people that prior to the interview happening, since it was the week of Thanksgiving, and we did the interview on a Tuesday, I think. He said, I can go up until Thanksgiving if you like. So I think by the time we were getting close to 4 hours, we were thinking, this is pushing it. But sometimes when we thought it was about to end, then he started talking about something else, and he wanted to keep going. So that's the great thing about him, is that, yes, he is the Peter Jackson, and he made Lord of the Rings and all this other stuff. And he's this legendary director now, but he's a fan like the rest of us, and he wants to learn as much as he can. And he's trying to learn from us, as well as other fans too. So he couldn't have been nicer. But
I remember when I was in high school, my best friend, Michael Felsher, who now has gone on to oversee the special features on a lot of DVDs, brought me Bad Taste, Peter's first film, which has a huge couple of Beatles things. You know, like he has the Sergeant Pepper characters on the windows of one of the main character's car, and just going, oh my God, what is this? And then fast forward 32 years later, and he's basically, you know, finally telling the story of Let It Be. That's just unbelievable. So, but yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah. Well, like I said, anytime you want to come back, just let me know. And I kind of wish you were at the fest. You're always in North Carolina, or?
You know, I do miss, you know, I was in New York quite a bit for those shows, the Left Banke. I've worked all over nationally, but I'm a little more in North Carolina right now because the work is here. As a photographer, a lot of organizations have not done an event in 2 years. So it's like going from, I describe it as going from zero to, oh my God. But this is something I've been waiting on for a long time. So while I won't be up north for the fest, and hello to everybody at the fest, and I miss y'all, and I hope to be back soon. I'm hoping that I won't get lost in that. Much as I love North Carolina, North Carolina's been very good to me. I should mention, hence my raging Southern accent, I'm originally from upstate New York, but I've just lived in North Carolina most of my life. So that's why I talk funny.
Sound normal to me.
Oh, thank you. I always say, if I down here, people think I sound northern. If I go upstate New York, people think I sound southern. So there you are. But I really hope to be up there soon. And please, yeah, definitely go say hi to Don. Say hi to all the guests that are coming up for the fest. Again, and thing I've discovered over the last couple of years is we all need each other. You know, whether it's email or text or phone or this and that, or these podcasts, we all need to interact and we all need to live. So Ken, I know you and a lot of your friends are going to do a lot of living during the fest. So definitely send me reports.
Okay, I will. And we will provide the link for the Cyrkle's website, because I certainly want to know about dates if they're doing more of them. Since I live in Connecticut, anything Northeast, and I'm certainly going to promote those. So
they have several dates in the Northeast coming up. And if you're in North Carolina, they'll be part of Fab Fest, which is a Beatles festival that I'm a part of. That will be here in Charlotte, July 22nd and the 23rd. We'll have the Fab Four here on the 22nd, and then the Cyrkle and a special guest soon to be named will be part of the day portion of the fest. And this past year, I spoke at 7 panels and then interviewed Joey Mullen, which was a dream come true.
Yeah.
And that, you know, Joey was the dream guest, and I'd love to have Joey back soon. So yeah, that was, and for a lot of us, that was like our first major event, you know, large show in 18 months. So that was a beautiful night, a beautiful weekend that was. But yeah, please come to see the Cyrkle in July and check out thecircle.com, and stay tuned for news on the new album.
Okay, Joey's a great guy. I've known him since the 80s, interviewed him several times, seen him in concert many times. And yeah, in fact, when I started my YouTube channel, he was my first guest.
Man,
so
I met him in 2006, and I kind of pushed my way into having dinner with him after the show, and he was telling me stories about, oh yeah, George Harrison called me up and invited me to see the band at Royal Albert Hall. It's just like stories like, you're kidding me, you know. It's like, what a life. But man, you know, it was a lot of, especially over these last couple of years, I've really appreciated these moments of my life coming back, and I like to think I'm enjoying them now as much as ever.
Okay, Daniel, thanks so much, and we'll keep in touch. And thanks to all of you for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already, and we'll see you all next time. Take care.
Cheers.